Hi, everybody, and welcome to SEMH in the Classroom. My name's Louisa Rose, and I am the CEO of the Youth Mental Health Charity Beyond. I'm also the founder of this mental health festival, Now and Beyond, and I am delighted to welcome you here today. Thousands of educational settings have been taking part across the UK today in our festival, accessing resources that are often hard to reach to support the needs of your pupils, but also yourselves. And this session is no different. So we always dedicate an hour to staff wellbeing because we recognise the strain and the pressure that the education community is under right now. We all think that you're absolute heroes, and we just want to do whatever we can to support you. Um, though the title of this session is not as sort of obvious as staff wellbeing, as it has been in the past, we've chosen it because we recognise the rise in SEMH needs in the classroom, but we also recognise the limited access to knowledge and tools for you to support those children. And in, feeling maybe unequipped, that really can have a detrimental impact on your well-being. So this is what today's session is all about. It's about getting practical tips to arm yourself with a little bit more knowledge, so that we hope that it will reflect in a boost in your own well-being in the classroom, that you might feel better tooled up, let's say. So there are two speakers that are here today to take us through this session. The first one is Alice Moore, who is an incredibly warm and compassionate educator and senior mental health lead. Alice has got a genuine desire to make a difference to the lives of all young people, which I think is something we all share in common. Alice also works as a consultant, trainer, and a speaker. She has trained in Thrive, Trauma Informed Schools, ELSA, Draw and Talk, Mental Health First Aid, and the Mindfulness in School project. In her role as a senior mental health lead, Alice has actually empowered parents and staff teams, and she's supported children one-to-one and in group settings, as well as delivering bespoke mental health education to primary aged pupils. Alice designed and led the whole school's relational approach in her setting. Her relational policy is now actually used as an example for schools across the UK, and Ofsted cited her school's wellbeing provision as exemplary. So we're very lucky to have Alice with us today. Joining Alice is Karl Pupé. Karl Pupé is a qualified classroom teacher, leader, and an educational consultant with over a decade's experience in the primary, secondary, and further education sectors. He's also the award-winning author of the books The Action Hero Teacher series, and he's the founder of actionheroteacher.com. For 14 years, Karl has mentored, taught, and worked with some children with really challenging needs in the London area. Specialising in behaviour management, he has worked as a not in education, employment or training and needs coordinator and alternative provision lead. He's taught schools with severe emotional, social, emotional, and mental health needs. And his main focus was to help those learners re-engage and reintegrate into mainstream schooling. Karl has worked with a number of organisations within education, including the National Education Union and the Chartered College of Teaching and the University of Essex. So I am delighted to have them here today. I'm going to be handing over to them in a second, but in the meantime, I really hope that this session is useful for you. Please let us know your feedback. It's the only way that we can maintain Now and Beyond as a free resource for you all. There's a QR code that will pop up at the end. So if you could scan that and let us know how you felt that the session went, that would be super, super helpful. Thank you so much. And over to Alice and Karl.
Hello, Alice. It's a massive honor and pleasure to speak to you again. I
Oh,
thoroughly enjoyed our conversation last time, but now this is the Champions League final. This is the big one.
no, likewise. It's lovely to see you again, and I'm so pleased we get to have this conversation. And for us to be part of the festival is amazing. So, yeah, wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you and big up and shout out Louisa for putting us together. So,
Absolutely, absolutely.
so without further ado, let's converse. Let's talk about this. staff well-being and SEMH needs in the classroom. It's a big topic, but we're gonna try and break it down like IKEA bunk beds, the best that we can.
I love
Faulty
that.
IKEA bunk beds. So we're gonna try and so how should we address it? I think the best I think just coming talking off the top of my head, the best way to describe it is that this is a very interesting time. It's a very challenging time. Okay. I always think about COVID-19 when the nurses were going into the hospitals in their final years of training. And I remember that wonderful person, Matt Hancock, saying to the nurses on that Big Brother screen, saying that this is not normal. And I wish there was an equivalent for teachers because this is not normal. I've been in education 16 years now, getting on, and what we're seeing is not normal. So I want to say from my heart, and I'll do it properly, not like Elon Musk, but from my heart, okay, that we appreciate how stressful it is and we appreciate how difficult it is at the moment. And it's not about us saying you're doing things wrong, because this is not normal in terms of behavior, what's going on in the world. And I know you're doing the very best that you can. So straight away, thank you for your service. Straight
Yeah.
off.
Absolutely, I totally echo everything you said because we both worked on the front line ourselves. We've been there. I'm still there, so we really do understand, and I think we're coming at this from a point of view that we really want to be supporting as many staff as we can. And I think what we talked about when we chatted before was about how the SEMH needs in the classroom and staff well-being go hand in hand because of course they impact each other. And what we wanted to try and do today was to really try and address that and try and use all the training that we've both had to try and support people out there. I know we talked a lot about looking at behaviour through a trauma-informed lens. So I wonder whether we could talk about that a bit in terms of how that shaped the way we were with the children and how that supported our well-being as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing we really need to talk about is that there's a saying that I always used when I was training my staff, when I was a NEETs coordinator, not in employment education or training or an alternative provision lead. And I always said that you have to teach to their biology as well as their psychology. And why this is really important, and also I'll add a little caveat to that, that you've got to look after your own biology as well as your own psychology as well. So if you, for example, have had 3 hours of sleep, you have had a big row at home, and now you're going to work, your car's been broken into, you're not going to be in the best state of mind to be able to teach. We understand that as teachers, that I almost see it like as athletes, we've got to almost, fuel up, treat ourselves like we're preparing to play in a professional sport, because the job, unlike other jobs, you can't hide. You could, some other jobs you can go and hide in your cubicle and your office and be left alone for large parts of the day. You can't do that in teaching. Once you've got 30 eyes on you, it's game on. All right. So we've got to be prepared for that. So I think what is really important is to understand on some level how the biology works and how the biology and the psychology go together, because if you're dysregulated and then they're dysregulated, we're talking about fireworks, and we don't want that to happen. So it's important to understand that.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important point, that it works both ways, doesn't it? We know how we feel when we come into work and we've had a difficult, I've got young twins, for example, so I know all about sleep deprivation. And you turn up and obviously you open the door and it's like you're on stage. You sort of, you're performing, aren't you? And you're there in front of them. And I think what we have to do is try and apply that same idea to the children, to be curious about what's going on behind the scenes. What is it that we don't see? We don't necessarily see what's going on at home before they come to school. And I think having that approach, the trauma-informed approach, and really being curious about why they're exhibiting the behavior they are, then that can really help us to move things forward in a positive way.
Absolutely. That's brilliant what you said, Alice. And just to add on to that, because I can imagine there's somebody saying, so when we talk about trauma-informed approach, and both of us were talking about in the previous conversation, is we've done a lot of training, both of us. And as soon as people hear the word trauma-informed approach, you can just feel the eyes rolling in the back of their head, and somebody saying, well, I'm not their psychologist. It's not I can't fix it, Karl. I can't fix their house. I can't fix cost of living crisis. I've heard it enough times to know this is true. Somebody's out there saying, yeah, this guy's right. But but what we've always got to say, so whoever's out there is thinking, this is all well and good, trauma-informed approach, but my job is to teach. My job is to make sure they pass their GCSEs or their end of year SATs or their A levels. My job is not to fix their problems. What I always say to those people is, you are a paramedic, you're not a surgeon,
Hmm.
right? And I always use this analogy. So, really super quickly, if there's an accident on the road, what do? We call 999. A paramedic shows up. Paramedic will go and assess the wounds and try and arrange transport to that person so they can get specialist care. The paramedic's job is not to fix them by the road. So if it's on the M25, he's not going to close the whole M25 and say, "Hi, my name is Stephen, and I'll be looking after you for a week." It's not feasible because they don't have the tools and equipment that a specialist hospital has. It's exactly the same when it comes to dealing with SEMH and children that have got vulnerable or complex needs. It's not within our gifts to be able to fix their housing issues or be able to fix the domestic violence or be able to fix the cost of living crisis. That's not within our gift. But what we can do, similar to a paramedic, is that we can assess, we can stabilize, and provide an environment which is conducive to them learning. We can all do that. And it doesn't have to be, taking them and, sitting them in a shrink chair. We can do these things, and it's all, as Tesco says, I hope we don't get sued by Tesco. Every little helps. Louisa, I'm sorry, if you get sued, it's you. It's not us, right? But every little helps, okay?
Yeah.
So I think that's what I want people to understand. It's not adding to your workload. It's not saying that you have to do, all magic tricks and jazz hands and smile and have fireworks like, a Michael Jackson concert. But it's just the small things that we do every single day that can help create that safe, stable, and boundaried environment which they can learn.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think we talk about a lot about every interaction is an intervention, that actually we have interactions all day long. And we're so privileged that we spend so much time with these children. We sometimes see them more than their parents do. And actually, I always find that it's really interesting when you think about that idea of, yeah, but I'm their teacher, not their social worker. But when I think about that, I think actually, in order for the child to learn, if you know about the psychology and the neuroscience behind it, they actually can't learn unless they feel psychologically safe in the classroom. So actually, the two go hand in hand, so actually creating that safety for them is for me, and I know for you as well, Carl, is the absolute foundation of what happens in the classroom. And it makes the environment more enjoyable for you as a teacher as well.
Love it.
It really does. Once you've got those connections, because essentially it's all about relationships, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Alice, could I just ask you for the uninitiated, because there's a little secret you're hiding because you are a contributor to a very important book. Do you want to talk about that? So I've got two things, if you allow me to humbly suggest, I want you to do. Tell people about the book, and also could you go into the neuroscience? Because there's some people saying, okay, that sounds great, but what exactly is it? Could you kind of give us a neuroscience 101, talking about fight or flight states and that type of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked with a pediatric neuroscientist called Dr. Andrew Curran, and he's actually been involved with Mental Health First Aid England as well. So I've actually worked with Mental Health First Aid England to develop their youth program. And so Andrew Curran is, he's incredible and so knowledgeable. And so I worked with him on, written a second edition of his book. And the reason we did that is because we very much felt like actually we need to have the voice of the teacher in the book, someone that's actually worked in classrooms and understands it all. And I think what we talked about, Carl, didn't we, is that actually in terms of the neuroscience, both of us have done a lot of training around it, but sometimes I think actually just bringing it back and understanding it from a more simple perspective can just help us. So I always use the hand model of the brain by Dan Siegel, and I'm sure you've used it as well. It's just a really useful way of explaining about how the brain works. So the children at our school learn this too. So they learn about the fact that actually, that the hand can be the brain. So we've got the brainstem here with all your vital functions, your movement, your digestion. And then inside we talk about the limbic area of the brain where all the emotions come from. And then the prefrontal cortex at the top. And then we talk about it working as a team. So we say that, that in order for them to be at their best and for them to be able to learn to their optimal level, it needs to be working together as a team. But what we do know is that children who have experienced adverse childhood experiences, they are much more likely to go into have a amygdala triggered very easily
Fight or
by
flight.
situations in the classroom, which other children might not be, because they're hardwired for survival, as we all are. But for children that have experienced adverse childhood experiences, their amygdala is trigger happy.
Yeah.
So that's what we're seeing in the classroom. We're seeing that coming out in their behavior. So we often talk about them flipping their lid. So the prefrontal cortex has gone offline. And actually, what that means for us as teachers is actually they're not able to learn when they're in that state. So we need to be able to support them in order to get them to be their absolute best they can be, and that's what we all want. So
Absolutely. No, that's a really brilliant explanation. I love that. Flipping the lid, and I've always used that. Another way to look at it is emotional hijacking by Daniel Goldman.
mm,
Emotional intelligence. I like that because I always have just this image of the monkey brain. So basically, you've got your prefrontal cortex or your neocortex, which is the front of the brain. And then once you go into what is called a fight or flight or adrenalized response, this is more of the quote unquote animal response. So if I see a tiger, so I'm in my home, and if I see a Siberian tiger coming towards me or a bear, I'm not going to really be talking very politely. You're going to probably hear a lot of blue words coming out of my mouth, and I'll probably grab my family and run out of the house. I'm not going to be thinking about my existence and connection and that type of thing. I'm thinking about survival. So we become emotionally hijacked, and as you said, prefrontal cortex, neocortex goes offline. You are just thinking about I need to survive. Now that's all well and good if you're dealing with a bear or you're dealing with a tiger. But the problem is, for some of our young people, they live with the equivalent of a tiger or a bear in their home. So if you've got somebody who, for example, has experienced DV or domestic violence, and their dad, just say, for example, I don't want to gender it, but it could be dad or mum, but basically somebody comes home and they start screaming and shouting at them. What ends up happening is they might go to school, an adult might raise their voice, and what that does is that it triggers the adrenal response or the survival response, fight or flight response, and they start either shutting down, freezing, or fighting. And sometimes it's like, where did that come from? Like you hear teachers say, "Where did John was all right, and where did that come from?" It's because he wasn't thinking of you. You triggered something. It's kind of similar to what happens. So we can talk about PTSD. When you've got veterans that come from war and they hear a bang, maybe a balloon pops, and all of a sudden they're back in whatever war zone they were in. And it's a kind of similar thing to that. So I love that explanation. And this is where it's creating that safe environment for them is really important. And when we, just to add on what you're saying as well, of course you can have big things like violence or, I don't know, it's witnessing a fire, witnessing someone dying. But when we talk about trauma, there's big T trauma, like,
mm,
someone getting stabbed in front of you, that's big T trauma. But little T trauma could be emotional neglect. Little
mhm.
T trauma can be maybe you don't eat, you don't have 3 meals, you have 2 meals. Little T trauma could be, I don't know, being told you're not good enough. So it's not just the big things we have to watch for in schools, like sexual abuse and all that. There's also other things as well, and these can all kind of add up and create these responses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's why I think you and I feel so passionately about, the work that we do is because actually we can make such a difference. And we both know that the job is incredibly hard. But I think actually if you think about it, the way I see it, if you think about it through this lens of looking at it through the relational approach, which is the approach that I've developed at my school, it really helped you to enjoy the job more as well, because actually what you're doing is really getting to know the individual stories in your classroom and really getting to understand like the needs behind the behavior, being there's a phrase that I learned on training called curious not furious. So
Ooh,
like, yeah, I
I'm
thought you'd
licking
like
that,
that one.
Alice.
I thought you'd
Mine
like.
now.
So
Sorry, I had to take
yeah.
it.
Yeah, no, I knew you'd like that one. Yeah, curious, not furious. That's actually, it's really interesting, isn't it? That actually, if we take that approach of being curious about it, and it helps us to have compassion towards what we're seeing, and
Absolutely.
it's just sort of looking at it from a different perspective, isn't it? And I think you were saying when we chatted before about how, like we can understand, we totally understand how hard it is and how difficult it is when you've got these behaviors in the classroom. But we also know that there is a way that it can be supportive for your well-being as well as the children.
Absolutely. Now, Alice, you spoke about something really important in our last conversation, which was behavior as communication. And
Mm,
you were talking about the great work that you've done in your school as well, in
mm,
regards to how you took a coaching model over a sanctioning model. Can you
mhm.
speak a bit more into that? Because that was really intriguing for me to hear. And I think the
Absolutely.
wonderful audience will love that as well.
Absolutely. So we adopted a relational policy. So we actually don't have a behavior policy. And at the time, like it was a year in the making. So, I did loads of research into it. I read so many policies to try and get a really good understanding of it. And I guess what I came back to is this idea that we are teachers. And there's a poem that I shared with you, didn't I, last time,
Oh, I love that.
which is about the idea that what do we do if a child doesn't know how to swim? We teach them. What do we do if a child doesn't know how to read? We teach them. And then the last sentence is, what do we do if a child doesn't know how to behave? And then it sort of says, why is it so difficult to finish that sentence? Because
Mm,
actually, we just need to teach them. That's what we're in the job of. We're teachers. So actually, with the restorative approaches that we've adopted, which is part of our relational policy, the whole point is that we're actually trying to help the child to learn from the behavior. So recognizing that we all make mistakes. So we make mistakes in maths, and we get support with that, don't we? And we are going to make mistakes in our behavior. Adults make mistakes with their behavior,
yeah.
and children's brains aren't fully developed until they're in their mid-20s. So of course they're going to make mistakes with their behavior. So we just have to be compassionate towards that. And we also talked, which I think is a really important point, about the fact that it's not actually a soft approach, because what we talked a lot about is having the balance between nurture and structure. So actually, the boundaries are really important for children to feel safe.
Absolutely.
And you and I were saying that there's, that we feel is fundamental. They need to have those boundaries, but you
Absolutely.
can do it alongside nurture at the same time. It is possible.
Absolutely. Just to add on to that, which is wonderful again, and I really find that intriguing. I hope I get a chance to visit your school because I'd love to see how that works. Um, but I find it fascinating because I know another objection is, so you expect us to be Mary Poppins, Carl and Alice? So you expect us to come in on our umbrella and, if a child throws a chair at me and breaks my arm, I'm expected just to be lovely and nice and smile and say that I understand. No, you don't have to be Mary Poppins, I always reply, but you don't have to be Genghis Khan either. There is a lot of ground in between Mary Poppins and Genghis Khan. And I think some of us are more Genghis Khan, some of us are more Mary Poppins. But in all seriousness, I discussed this a lot, and we discussed this as well, that there's a difference between sanctioning and discipline. And again, I can see people rolling their eyes and say, oh, here we go, semantics. No, it's not semantics. It's really important to understand. And you know what? What I love about teachers, especially in the early in their career, they really struggle with this. They really struggle with understanding the difference. Like, oh, I know he's got a lot going on at home, but I don't want to punish him. And how can I be loving, but yet how can I, or how can I be caring, but yet giving sanctions? And I always break it down like this. And I think we spoke about this in our last conversation. There's a difference between punishment and sanction. So if you looked in the dictionary and you got the word punishment, it comes from the Latin word penere, penere. I didn't do Latin, so you guys can tell me, but I'm going to say penere. That's what I'm going to say. So penere, and it means basically retribution. Okay, it means retribution. It means revenge. This is something, and it's really important. So when we punish somebody, it's almost like an act of revenge. There's an emotional element there, right? And it's really important. So if somebody does something to me, I'm taking my revenge. That is never what you want to do as a teacher. Now, if you look at the word discipline, right? So instead of sanction, let's talk about discipline. Discipline comes from the Latin word discipulis, which means learner. So when we talk about it, especially in many religious organizations, people were disciples. And in terms of martial arts, they're disciples. It means learner. And there's a difference because that is how the approach you should take it. You're not doing it to hurt them. You're doing it to discipline them, to help them. Another helpful example I learned was, I love this. There's a difference between hurting and harming. And sometimes we end up hurting people. So for example, we hurt people to help them. So when I go to the dentist and I've got a hole in my tooth, okay, it hurts, all right? The dentist has to drill it out and take it out so that it can heal properly, right? So although the action hurts in the short term, is to promote well-being. Harming is where you're doing things that are good in the short term, but it's harmful in the long term. So when I'm eating all those sweets and I'm eating all my, I love my Haribos and I'm chucking it all down in my mouth and I'm thinking, oh, this is good times. But then the hole in my teeth starts to develop. That is harm, right? And that's the difference. So we want to correct the behavior. So when we sanction, and it's so brilliant because we've got such a similar approach. When in my old school, when I used to be alternative provision lead, I always, the first thing I answered, I said, what do you do when you get a young person and you have to give them a detention? And they would say, get them to sit down and do lines, or get them and then we berate them and tell them, how terrible they are. And I'm like, that is just, number one, a waste of time. Number two, you're not going to feel good if you're just telling someone how rubbish they are. I
Mm.
always said this is a teachable moment. This is where the coaching comes into play. So I've got little Antoine, or I've got little Johnny or Megan, and I'll say, okay, look, we're here together now. We've got a 20-minute detention. Let's go for it. Let's talk about it. How are you feeling? Let's talk about it. And that's where the coaching and the correction goes. And it's a completely different experience, because now
Absolutely.
they can come away with learning. Because as you said, if you get a child, he comes in, especially if the child feels like, oh, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm sure you've seen, I didn't do nothing. Oh my gosh, oh my days. What, sir? What did I do? You know them ones. And they're coming in and you get there, you're rubbish, you're terrible, you did this. And then this is a classic teacher line, get out of my sight. And it's like, the kid's baffled, or the kid's like, oh, sir doesn't like me, or miss doesn't like me, right? They haven't learned anything. All you've done is made them feel terrible. And then these are the same kids that end up not wanting to come to your class, or end up deliberately getting thrown out. Whereas if you come and say, look, Antoine, Megan, let's sit down, let's talk. What happened? This one said you had a fight. What could we do next time to prevent that from happening? That is a much more useful use of time. Okay, and that's the difference. So although there are 20-minute sanctions there, look how teacher A dealt with it and teacher B dealt with it. Completely different outcomes. And that's what we're talking, just to ground it and make it more practical.
Absolutely, that's brilliant, Carl. Thanks so much. It's so brilliant to hear your perspective on it. And I was, when you were talking, it made me think about we can't make a child behave better by making them feel worse about themselves. I just that's really what came to mind when you were talking. I was just thinking, actually, if we think about in relation to us as adults, when we've made a mistake, how do we want that to be responded to? How do we want our partner, how do we want our boss to respond to us? We would respond much better to a kind and compassionate boss who's on our side. We're on as a team that believes in you and really believes you can do it, but actually just knows that this time you slipped up and you just need some support. And I think for those children that aren't getting those positive reinforcements at home, it's even more important that we're giving them at school. So what we're trying to avoid is confirming the beliefs that they're not good enough, that they've picked up from if they have had adverse childhood experiences. So we want to try and redirect that, and really connect with those people in front of us. And I think last time we talked about ways that you can connect with them and get to know them, and you had that really good Ford. I wanted to bring that one in.
There you go.
How to get to know them.
Think of Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford, or think of your motor, Ford motor, where I'm from anyway, in East London, Ford motor. So what you tend to find, and I'm so happy you brought this up, Alice, in regards to, especially with the children that tend to get the heavier sanctions, what tends to happen is they almost become immune to it,
Mm,
because it reaffirms the label that they have of themselves. So they'll say, I'm a bad boy, I'm a bad
mm,
girl, you can't tell me nothing. I'm the
mm,
worst in the school, and some of them might walk into class and say, "I'm the worst person in the school." Now, the
yeah.
reason why they're doing that is not because they believe they're the worst person. It's almost like, I'm gonna get the words you say, and I'm gonna wear it like a suit of armor, so you can't hurt me. So if you say
Mm,
I'm bad, I say I'm worse, because that way it's almost like you can't hurt me. It's like punching themselves in the face almost, and it's like saying, "Look, see, it doesn't hurt," when we know it does hurt. So they start to become hardened. So when I used to go and coach, well, not when I used to, I still go and coach, but when I was alternative provision lead, and a teacher would come to me and say, look, this kid's come back in my class, John, I can't deal with John. I always come with the same thing. So I'll sit the teacher down, I'll talk to them. Okay, John is crazy, he messes up my class, he disrupts it, I've got to kick him out, blah, 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 blah. And I'll say something along the lines of this. So I'll let the teacher talk, I'll listen, and I'll say, what's his favorite football team? Ah, what? Okay, how many siblings does he have? Do you know anything about where he lives? Do you know anything? And they'll say, well, okay, what's this all got to do with them? What's it got to do, right, with this? And I say, look, if you want to influence, you can't influence somebody you don't know. That's the bottom line. If my missus says, look, I want to go and watch this latest romantic film, right, I'll go, because that's my missus. That's the person I love. If a random guy on the street says, let's go and watch a romantic film together, I'll say, no, thank you, guy or girl. I don't know you, because we haven't got that relationship. Right. So if, it could be, anyway, let me not get myself in trouble. My wife could be watching this, but what we've got to understand, especially with these young people, is that a lot of the time they're pushed away, or they feel that they're rejected, or they feel that they're othered, right? So I came up with a framework called Ford. So I always say, and this has worked 9 times out of 10 for most teachers, I say, if you make an attempt, if to show interest in their lives, sorry, let me say that again. If you make an attempt to show interest in their lives, they're going to make an attempt to show interest in what you have to say. You cannot influence somebody unless you're willing to be influenced. That is the nature of the game. So I always said, I want you to find this kid that's driving you absolutely bonkers. And I want you to find 3 interesting facts about them. Okay. There are 3 magic words. And this is, I can't remember the research on this, but I remember anyway. But if somebody, there was a study showing how do you make people like you? And what shocked me was, if somebody's talking about something I love, right? So just imagine me and you, Alice, were talking, and that's why we built up a rapport, because we both like something. And somebody just simply says, so if I'm talking about Arsenal football team, just say, for example, and, I'm talking and I'm really animated, and Alice, you just say, tell me more. Tell me more about that. And you say, oh, Arsenal, blah, 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 blah. Maybe not now at this time of recording, but yeah, blah, blah, blah. I love Arsenal, blah, blah, blah. What ends up happening is that you'll walk away. What this research concluded was that you'll walk away thinking, oh, Alice, she's really cool. I like her because because what you've done is you've shown interest in that person, and you've let them, and these are things that, when we talk about, so let me break Ford down. So Ford stands for family. Okay. So ask them about family. Occupation. What do they want to do when they grow up? Now, I understand if you're dealing with early years, it doesn't even matter. In early years, they want to be astronauts, they want to be firemen, they want to be policemen. They have got an aspiration to be something, all right? Maybe not an accountant, but we'll get there. So we've got family, we've got occupation. R stands for recreation. What do they like to do? What do they enjoy? What music? What, games, all right? What do they like? And then dreams, okay? What are their dreams? What are their aspirations? One person's dream could be to retire their mother. One person's dream is to play for the Premier League. We've all got dreams. And these things are precious to us. They are our precious jewels. Okay. So if somebody's willing to share that with you, that means they can trust you. Okay. And if a young person feels that you don't like them, right, it's because that you've put a barrier. It's almost like saying, I don't want to know you. You're just a bad child. Leave me alone. But if we start to show interest, and this is the fastest way to build up that classroom rapport, if we start to show interest in their Ford, family, occupation, recreation, or dreams, 9 times, I've been doing this almost 16 years, and something always shifts, because that child now starts to believe that, what, sir has an interest in me, or miss has an interest in me. So I would say, find that child that you feel you cannot connect with, and gently, don't say, what are your family? What are your dreams? Tell me now. No, don't do that. Don't do that, right? You might get yourself fired, right? But just gently. So if something comes up and they say something like, oh, that's a really sick track, tell me more. Add those 3 magic words. Tell me more. What do you mean? What do you like about it? And you'll start to see them start to open up. Ford. So that's my tip anyway.
I
Alice.
actually love that. No, I love that, Carl. It's brilliant, because I think what we talked about a lot about is connection being key to it all. The relationships that you form with these children, that's what's going to be the transformative piece. So anything that can help you build that relationship, and there's that phrase that's called keeping them in mind. So there was a child I remember that he needed a lot of support. There were lots of really, really difficult behaviors in the class, and I just decided to remember something that he did outside of school that he loved. So every week I'd, without fail, make sure I asked him about that, and it was just, you could see his whole body language change. Like you could see that he was so animated when he talked about this love that he had outside of school, that he wanted to share, and also the fact that I cared and I was interested. That made such a difference, and you could see, and I genuinely feel that really impacted in terms of his behavior over time, because there's a phrase when you were talking, it made me think of children who need love the most ask for it in the most unlovable ways. you know yeah, I just always think that it's always stayed with me. It's such a powerful phrase.
I wish
And
I got a pen and pad, because there's so many phrases you've said that I can't, I need to talk to you after. You need to just send me all these phrases. Say that again, please. I love that. Please say
yeah,
that again.
we're bouncing off each other, because when you're making me think of them. So yeah,
So what is it? A child that needs the
children who
most
need
love.
love the most ask for it in the most unlovable ways. Yeah, yes, I'm sure I must have had that through training somewhere, but it just always stayed with me, because it's so true. And actually, we've had children in the school that will push back, because actually what you have to remember is that for some children, the relationship isn't safe. They haven't experienced safety through their relationships. So that's why they're giving you a hard time. And it's the idea that they're having a hard time. They're not trying to give you a hard time, they're hurting inside. And so if we can get to know them and not give up on them, there's that phrase, isn't there? Positive, unconditional, positive regard.
But
It's
yeah,
really hard. It's really hard to do when a child is pushing back. But I
mm,
had an amazing TA at my school who just said to me that she just was relentless with this boy, just constantly didn't give up on him, like he pushed her back, in every way you can imagine. And
mm,
she did not give up on him. And eventually their trust was built, and that transformed the relationship and his behavior as a result.
absolutely.
Okay,
And
so
just to add on to that route super quickly, because I love all of that, I want to gender it slightly a bit, especially when you're, because one of the things, especially in London, we've got a lot of youth crime, especially around young males. And I always said this in my trainings that anger is the bodyguard of pain. So when you've especially got a young man, and I'm not saying, and I want to be really clear here, I'm not saying other genders don't can't be angry, but I'm just talking about this particular point here. What has happened, especially with the young men, especially when we're talking in the inner city, is that that behavior, especially anger and aggression, is socially accepted, so to speak, amongst their peers, right? So anger is the bodyguard of pain. Anger is the top emotion, but it's often hiding a deeper emotion or more vulnerable emotion that they don't want to reveal. And I always give this example. So just say you've got a young man who lost his grandma during COVID. What is more socially acceptable in front of his peers? To break down in tears and cry and say how much he misses his grandma, or to flip a table and flip the bird to the teacher and tell him to go and stick it where the sun don't shine. So one of the things that we have to do, especially when you're dealing with young men or dealing with people that have got more what we would say in terms of uh, a fight or flight response, more of a fight response, is to say that it's okay to be vulnerable. Because what ends up happening is every time they say I want to cry or want to be sad, the anger pops in and says no, we're gonna shut that off and we're gonna do something. We're gonna flip a table or say f you or whatever you know they can say to
mhm.
their teacher. So it's really important to do that. You had a really powerful exercise that you do in your school. It was called I Wish My Teacher Knew. Please
Yeah.
tell us that because that
Yeah,
was
so again, it came from I think that was trauma-informed school training that I had. They recommended that you put in every classroom you have a jar that says it's called "I wish my teacher knew," and the idea of that is that it opens it up for building that actually for your Ford idea, it builds up that idea that they can put in something into the jar that they wish their teacher knew about their life, and through that jar, I've had children that have actually like disclosed things that are safeguarding disclosures or but sometimes what it does is it just means that they can talk about their home life, because we know what the school day is like. We know that you feel like you're on a treadmill all day, and I don't know about you, Carl, but a lot of the times when I've been talking about this, people will say, I really want to build the connections, but I just really struggle with the time. So actually what we really want to do is try and enable teachers to have a mechanism that works for them. So if they've got this jar in the classroom, they can just pick them out as and when they can, and then it just gives them that bit of understanding about the children in their classroom, and it just helps to build that connection. So
that's
you can
brilliant.
do it as a whole class and get them to all write down something that they wish that's how I would do it. Get them to write down one thing they wish their teacher knew, or you can just have it up like throughout the week so that people can drop it in as and when. But it's a really, really brilliant tool to use.
Absolutely. And I thoroughly recommend that. And if I was still working in schools, I'll be telling the higher ups. I mean, we've had such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, Alice, for your time. I've learned so much. Certain things are going to appear in my new book, Action Hero Teacher Free. And I'm sure it's just going to be based around all the quotes that you've given me. No, I'm joking. I'll never do that to you, Alice. We'll do it together. We'll do it together. Um, there you go. But I think what would be nice to end the conversation with is going back to teacher well-being. Now, we've spoken extensively about our young people, but is there any pearls or pearls of wisdom that you can offer the teachers out there? Especially, I'm thinking, it's the winter, not the winter term, it's the spring term. I'm getting all
Mm,
confused now. But
mm,
we're in the business. We're in the business end of the year. It's January. We're halfway through. They're flagging a little bit. Some
mhm,
teachers, and let's keep it 100% real, are thinking maybe this is not for me. I'm putting in all the work. I've done the data. I've done, everything that's been required of me, and I'm knackered. I'm tired, and yeah, you want me to take care of these kids, but I'm really starting to flag myself. Is there any particular words of wisdom for those teachers?
Do you know, I often think, what is the magic about being in the classroom? The magic of being in the classroom is that you can do really fun things that actually help regulate yourself that you can't do in any other job.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was in the classroom, I would often use things like songs and like dances, crazy dances. And like, I think that's so powerful, and it really helps to regulate us as the adults in the classroom just as much as the children. So the children are so sedentary often throughout the day, and actually just getting them moving is brilliant to help them feel regulated. But for us too, for us to join in with them, so I'm not in the classroom full time now, because I do my role of as a senior mental health lead. But if I was in the classroom now, what I would do is I would make sure that I was putting in regular movement breaks throughout the day that I was joining in with, because sometimes we pop it on, don't we? And then we don't join in. And actually, if we join in, we can get the benefits too. I'd have a class anthem. I think that's amazing to build that connection, to build your tribe in your class. Um, so we did it with Now and Beyond. We did a brilliant song last year called "Give Me Five," and that has been a massive hit in my school. The children love it. It's really upbeat, but it also teaches about regulation. So it's that, that would be a really great one to play in the classrooms. Yeah, I don't know if you've got any others to add, but
Um, I think I'll add really quickly. Ernest Hemingway. I think there's a line. I think this line came from Ernest Hemingway, where he said, "Things happen gradually, then suddenly." Now, when we talk about teacher burnout, and when we talk about things that happen, yes, of course, there could be things that happen in your life, like a sudden death of somebody, or I don't know, natural disaster, a tree falls on your house. Of course, no one can kind of predict that. But when we're talking about things like burnout, and when we're talking about things like, just not feeling good within yourself, it tends to, 9 times out of 10, it starts gradually by accepting more work or doing things. And then all of a sudden, you have a health crisis or a mental health crisis or something along those lines. It is really boring what I'm going to say, but this is the stuff your nan would tell you. But your nan is right. If you've still got your nana, make sure you call your nana, because your nana is very wise. Most of our nanas are anyway. But it's really boring. Try and get yourself some sleep. It's amazing, even with myself, that I've got a timer on my phone. I'm a bit of a nerd, which goes off around 9:30 that says, no more working, no more. This is time to wind down to go to bed. I think sleep is something that we really underestimate in terms of our health.
Mhm.
Getting sleep, trust me, when I had my child, forget the money. It was the sleep. This is a form of torture. When you're not sleeping, honestly, yeah, it's a form of torture. So it's the boring stuff. Try and sleep, exercise, try and do those things, try and connect. One of the things with teaching is that most teachers that I've ever met, they're so consumed with helping the kids, they don't
Mm.
help themselves. And there's a great quote from the ancient literature, which was to love others as you love yourself. And it's a balanced equation. It's a 50-50 equation. Okay, we're great at loving others, but we're not great at loving ourselves. And it doesn't have to be extravagant. Take those bubble baths, take that walk with your dog, eat a bit more salad. All right, I know broccoli and that is yuck, and spinach, but I've reached that age I have to eat those things whether I like it or not. All right, so do the boring stuff. And I'm telling you, I'm not saying it will fix it. I'm not saying, and I don't want to dismiss or trivialize what you're going through. If you do feel bad, or if you do feel like I'm struggling, reach out for some help. Go to your
Absolutely.
doctors, speak to your line manager. There's no shame in needing help. We all need some help. So by all means, I'm not trivializing what you're going through, but I am saying as well, there are what people call hygiene factors. So if you're not sleeping, you're not exercising or doing exercise, which is what you can do. You don't have to run a marathon, but even taking a walk, if you're not relating or connecting with people that you love, these things will all have an effect on your mental health. And I'm talking from a person who's been through stuff as well when I was a teacher. So I'm not talking like I'm above it. This is, I had some difficulties myself, but these were the things that I knew that would help me. If I could get my walk in, my little exercise, if I could eat healthily and sleep, I felt a lot better. And these are the boring things your nana will tell you, but it's true. So that's what I'll leave you with.
No, I love that. I think it's really important to think about those things. They're like the pillars of health, aren't they? And they're the
Absolutely.
things that we all need. And actually, in teaching, I think one of the biggest things is people don't take breaks. And
No.
I've made a point of going out for it's 10-minute walk. I go
Mhm.
out, I would like I make sure I do it. And honestly, I feel so much better for the afternoon. But it's small things, isn't it? But they accumulate and they really build up. So, I think you made some really great points. So, but honestly, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. Honestly, it's been, yeah, wonderful to have this time. I know we're on the same page and we really want to support people. So I hope we've managed to give people some things to take away today.
Absolutely. And thank you, Alice, so much for your time. I really
Yeah,
enjoyed
and
this
you. Thank
conversation.
you.
Oh, guys, it's been such a pleasure to listen to you and honestly an honor, but it also reminds me of the awe that I feel at just how valuable the work is that you guys do and that the teaching community does. So I want to say to everybody that's watching, like, you are enough. You are doing an amazing job. Arm yourself with as much knowledge as you can. Look after yourself, and each other. Oh God, that sounds a bit like one of those
Jerry
talks.
Springer.
Look after yourself and each other.
Jerry
Um,
Springer.
but no, I'm really, we really admire it beyond the work that you do, and we're here to support in whatever way we can. So thank you so much to Carl and Alice. You've been incredible. And for anyone that's watching that's a parent or a carer, we'll be back at 8 o'clock this evening, for Circle of Support, which sees a group of young people reflecting on the comments that parents make when they discuss their biggest worries. So, thank you so much again, and we will hopefully see you all soon. Bye.